Joe.
I'm right down here. What's up?
Not too much. How you doing, man? It's been a while.
I'm hanging in. Yeah, I'm bunkered down here. What's going on, Mark?
I can see that.
What?
You're pulling
It's a long day. What's going on?
not too much. We want to talk some college football, and we see that you've gone to great lengths to join us.
Yes, just got in. I'm busy as heck, but I make the time.
Thanks a lot. Man, let's talk about this college football playoff selection. We've got the four teams. There was a lot of controversy when we talk about Penn State possibly getting in because of the college football playoff. We're hoping that Joe can hear us right now. If not, I will just ramble to myself and all of you out there because Joe is a guy that is, again, I described him as an encyclopedia. Sometimes I'm described as an encyclopedia, but I defer to this guy, Mr. Joe Lisi. Joe, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Mark.
Okay.
I apologize. I just got in the house a little while ago. I do apologize, but yeah, I can hear you if you can hear me.
No worries, Joe. No worries, Joe, because before we dive into these semifinal matchups, I'd like to get your take on the four teams that made it, because Michigan's got a claim, Penn State had a claim, other teams across the country, those two in particular, Oklahoma to a certain extent. Did you feel good about the four selected?
I do. I mean, when you look at the top four teams in the playoff overall, I mean, I don't have a problem with Ohio State getting in over Penn State. For me, I mean, I look at Penn State's two losses this year, 42-39 on the road to an unranked Pittsburgh team, and the loss on the road in Ann Arbor where they allowed 336 rushing yards to the Michigan Wolverines. I know both Penn State and Wisconsin were hot teams down the stretch, but for me, both of them did have two losses. And when you look at that Ohio State loss on the road in Happy Valley, they dominated for much of the game. And yeah, Penn State pulled it out, but I think if they both played on a neutral field site, I honestly believe that Penn State would lose that matchup. So don't have a problem with Ohio State sneaking in, on top of the fact that the playoff committee did say that conference championships matter. But when you have two loss teams in the conference championship, it takes away from that championship in my eyes. I mean, that's the only thing that I think you look at. If it was Michigan with a one loss, or Ohio State with a one loss, or an undefeated team in the conference championship, and Penn State was able to dominate that game and pull out the victory, then I think they're deserving. But I think when you look at their two losses in 2016, I think Ohio State did in fact deserve the playoff over Penn State.
Joe, you know I'm a guy that likes to survey the teams, look across the conferences, and not be the knee-jerk reaction guy that says, okay, this team's 13-0, they're the best. That's all there is to it. But if you look at the Alabama performance week to week, starting with USC, and it would have been so great to see those two teams match up later in the season. I'm not saying USC would have won the game later, but they were just a different team 10 weeks later, as you well know. Is Alabama that much better than everybody else? And if so, or if not, who is the team out there or teams that can compete on the given night?
Yeah, I think Alabama is the best team in the regular season, but do they have defense and offensive weaknesses where they can be defeated on any given Saturday? Yeah. In my opinion, I think there's parity in college football. So, yeah, Alabama is the top team in the country entering the playoff. But are they dominant in the fact that they're just going to walk to the national championship? I don't think so. I think that there's two teams on their schedule in the playoff that can knock off Alabama, and I think one of them happens to be Washington with Jake Browning. I think when you look at the playoff overall, Alabama hitting on all cylinders, won now 13 straight games. They also now have a month and a half layoff. How is that going to affect their team in terms of timing, chemistry? They've done it before, and we just expect Nick Saban to do it. But they do have a freshman quarterback in Jalen Hurts. I think when you look at Washington's defense overall, the one thing that stands out for me, two things. Solid in run support, and they can run sideline to sideline. And their red zone defense has been phenomenal over the last month of the season. You look at that Pac-12 championship game against Colorado. They forced Sefau Lufau into mistakes in the red zone, and the red zone defense against Luke Falk on the road in Pullman really, in my opinion, believes that Washington could challenge Alabama. The other thing, too, is from an offensive perspective, they have two big play wide receivers in John Ross and Dante Pettis that can attack Alabama's secondary vertically. That's the way you neutralize Alabama's speed. It's not running sideline to sideline, where that's where their strong suit is, in pursuit, running sideline to sideline. So you don't run bubble screens and force them into their strength. You attack that defense head on with seam routes to neutralize the speed of Alabama's defense. And their two big play wide receivers, Dante Pettis and John Ross, can do that. So I think that Washington poses a big threat. The other thing is they force turnovers, plus 21 in turnover margin. So for me, this is one of the top teams in college football in turnover margin. You need to force turnovers on the road or on a neutral field site in the playoffs. So I think Washington poses a great risk to challenge Alabama. And then obviously the other one is Clemson and Deshaun Watson. They have a mobile quarterback in their secondary. You look at their secondary overall, holding opposing offenses to around 50% completion percentage. That's a solid statistic. And third down defense is another phenomenal statistic that both Washington and Clemson possess on the defensive side of the ball. So in my opinion, those are the two teams to challenge Alabama for the title.
So to you, Washington is not just another Michigan State. And if I hear you out, it's because more NFL players on defense, where Michigan State had a stout defense, but wasn't ultra talented. This Washington defense is. I'm hearing 7 NFL players on this defense. Jake Browning's more mobile at quarterback than Connor Cook. And those are two of the big differences, maybe?
Yeah, and then the other is Jalen Hurts is a freshman. Last year, Jake Coker was an experienced senior quarterback that had experience, for the most part, a little bit at Florida State, and then got his feet wet under Lane Kiffin following Blake Sims. So he was a seasoned veteran. To put all this expectation on Jalen Hurts, especially with a month-and-a-half layoff, that's a tough task. I don't care who the quarterback is, let alone a freshman. So I think a lot of people are overlooking that, just expecting Jalen Hurts to hit on all cylinders because he plays for Alabama. I think you got to keep an eye out for that as this game plays out. Jake Browning is a sophomore. Chris Peterson's also a master at formations. So keep that in mind as they play this game in late December, early January.
As you know, Joe, the last time we got a chance to see Ohio State on the same field with Clemson was in the Orange Bowl 3 years ago. It was a highly entertaining game. The Buckeyes had a 9-point lead in the fourth quarter. Philly Brown dropped a punt, and then it came unraveled. Taj Boyd and Sammy Watkins had a field day against the Ohio State defense, which was a bit depleted. No Bradley Roby, no Christian Bryant, Adolphus Washington or Noah Spence out of the game. They missed a number of guys on defense, but it was an entertaining game. Most of those guys have moved on. We're not going to see the same players on the field, but Ohio State and Clemson, this is a marquee matchup with tons of athletes all over the place.
It is, and I think that if you're looking at this game play out, if you're Ohio State, I don't think you want to get into a shootout with Deshaun Watson and the Clemson Tigers. I think you want to play a lower scoring game, even though Ohio State did get into a shootout at the early part of the year with Baker Mayfield in Oklahoma. But honestly, their offense in terms of the vertical passing game was much more cohesive at the early part of the year than it was down the line. I think when you look at this matchup overall, Ohio State has to contain Deshaun Watson in terms of rushing offense. You look at last year, the one thing that allowed Clemson to be so dominant on the offensive side of the ball was their ability to run the football effectively. They had 11 of 15 games where they rushed for over 200 yards of offense. Entering that ACC championship game, they only had 5 games this year where they rushed for over 200 yards of offense, and 2 of those came in the last 2 weeks of the regular season. So I think in order for Clemson to win this ball game, they're going to need Deshaun Watson on the ground. I mean, statistically, last year he had 1,105 rushing yards, averaging 5.5 yards per carry and 12 rushing touchdowns. In the ACC championship game, he entered that matchup rushing for only 444 yards on the ground and 4 touchdowns. That'll put a lot of pressure on the offensive line and, more importantly, Wayne Gallman. So I think that, Clemson needs to run the football, and they have to get up over 200 yards to have that offensive balance. If they become one-dimensional, that'll play right into Ohio State's strength, especially in the back end of the secondary. So I think that's the matchup that you want to see play out. It's a contrast in styles. Whichever team could dictate tempo early will probably win this game. And I think Clemson will favor a higher scoring game to get those wide receivers like Ray McLeod, Mike Williams, and Jordan Leggett involved in the offense early. And I think Gallman will have an impact as well in the short to intermediate passing game. I favor Clemson. I haven't made my selections yet, but I think this game favors Clemson early on. But we'll see how, once I do the research, how it'll play out a little bit later in January.
Yeah, I think this Ohio State defense is tremendous. Top 5 in the nation. Really the only team that found some scoring production for most of the game was Wisconsin, and then the Buckeyes clamped it down in the fourth quarter and in overtime. That was the one offense, and Wisconsin does not have a dynamic offense. Now, Clemson's a whole different deal for Ohio State to deal with when you talk about possibly the best quarterback in the country and a fleet of receivers, as you mentioned, that's pretty much unlike anybody else when you can go 5 or 6 deep. I know Virginia Tech's loaded and some other teams across the country, wide receiver, Texas A&M, but nothing like Clemson. You alluded to this, Joe, and it surprises me after seeing Ohio State go to Norman and dismantle Oklahoma and Noah Brown have a big game in the passing game and the Buckeyes be able to stretch the field, that after that, and this is surprising from an Ohio State team, and with Urban Meyer recruiting as he does, that really they've got nobody that scares anyone downfield, that blows the top off a defense, that can get separation, not just going downfield, but any kind of separation. The wide receiver play was subpar for an Ohio State, and that really needs to change for them to loosen up this Clemson defense and really have a shot.
Yeah, well, the one thing that Ohio State has done and has continued to do over the last couple of years is force turnovers on the road. I mean, Clemson for the last couple of years now has been right around 2 or 3 positive or negative. Last year when they were in the national championship game, they ended that year at -2. This year they're right around +2. So they're going to need to force turnovers. Whoever wins these games in terms of the college football playoff, because they're played on a neutral field site, the team that wins the turnover battle more times than not will win the football game. You can look at Alabama and Michigan State. They forced Connor Cook into mistakes early, and that translated into points. That's what you need to do in terms of these college football playoff games. The one thing that Ohio State has done this year is force turnovers. They're up there in the top 3rd in college football in terms of turnover margin. As long as they can do that and run the football with Mike Webster and J.T. Barrett, they have a shot. Now, is J.T. Barrett as elusive as Lamar Jackson? No. But he can put pressure on that Clemson perimeter and cause them to second guess and keep them off balance. That's the one thing. It's not so much it's the play calling that they utilize, Mark. They don't have to throw it 100 times per game, but it's when they call passing plays on 1st and 2nd down, traditionally running plays. If they call them and work off a play action early on running situations, they can have that Clemson defense off balance and then run the football later in that matchup. So it's going to be a very contrast in style. So you don't have to throw it 50, 60 times a game to have offensive success. But if you come out of the gate on running downs and throw the football effectively and force turnovers on the defensive side of the ball, you can control the clock and keep Deshaun Watson off the field. And that's what Ohio State has done in big games. And Urban Meyer, I mean, always has his teams mentally prepared. That's the one thing. Ohio State's going into this matchup expecting to win. So is Clemson. I mean, one of the best big game head coaches that we've seen in modern day is Dabo Swinney. Doesn't get enough credit for what he's done. He's knocked off teams like Auburn and Notre Dame, and he's knocked off, ACC championships, Ohio State a few years ago, LSU, Oklahoma in back-to-back years. So he's a big game head coach. Both of these teams resemble each other in terms of their mental fortitude. So it's going to be which team could dictate tempo early that'll probably get the victory, and more importantly, can force turnovers on the road.
Joe Lisi's site is goforthe2.com. Joe has been joining me here on Mark Rogers TV for a number of segments going back several years, and Joe's just a great guy. And like I say, encyclopedia when it comes to college football. Joe, I see you all over the place. You're taking pictures with Ron Jaworski and all these celebrities. I'm surprised that you got time for me. But But
Well,
I appreciate
always, Mark.
yes, you do.
I was in New York yesterday for the College Football Hall of Fame. Great class. Derek Brooks, Troy Davis, Mike Utley, Randall Cunningham covered that press conference. Went to the dinner at night. Also had the opportunity to interview my good friend Terry Bowden and his whole family, Bobby, Jeff, and Tommy, for a family interview, and Mrs. Bowden as well. It's we put together a 40-minute piece in the Waldorf. Bowdens have a movie coming out on January 8th, so happy to get the exclusive on that, and that'll be coming out within the next couple of days.
Joe, you're all over the place. I know if I try to explain to people where they can find you, find your content, I'm going to miss something. So give us the rundown. Where can we find you?
They can find me on Twitter at GoForThe2. All of my work is available at GoForThe2. That's the number 2.com. Every Saturday morning, they can follow me on SB Nation Radio. I do a 2-hour show with Campus Insiders, Associate Editor Rich Sermonello. That's 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern Time every Saturday. That's SBNationRadio.com or Fantasy Sports Radio Network, FNTSY.com /radio. And then I do a show every Friday in Vegas as well, 720 K-Dawn. I'm also on ESPN Radio in Baton Rouge. Each week I'll be breaking down the bowl situation for the upcoming college football season, bowl scenario. So we'll see how it plays out. Keep him busy, my friend.
And we've got to have you on back here to set us up, because in addition to the college football playoffs, which get all the attention, I just love bowl season. I know you do too. And I know it's difficult for the viewers and the listeners to tell this, because I talk about Joe as an encyclopedia, but he actually likes what he's doing too. You actually kind of like college football, don't you?
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a junkie when you say that, Mark. You know that I'm a former ABC Sports college football researcher for the late John Saunders and at the time Terry Bowden. I have about 900 games on tape, media guides. I mean, I've been following college football for about 40 years now, so long time.
Joe, we
30,
appreciate the time.
40 years, yeah.
And you were great. We need to have you back on. We're going to be diving into bowl games here in the next couple of weeks, so there's a ton of great matchups that I'm looking forward to, and I know you are as well. Joe Lisi from GoForThe2.com. Joe, we appreciate it.
Anytime, Mark. Love the show. Enjoy the week.